Hi, I'm Stephen Paul, and welcome to the Land of Israel, God's story. This is going to be an extraordinary adventure we go on with Academy Award winner Jon Voight, who's going to tell the greatest stories of the Bible.
Swings it around, and then he lets it go.
We're going to go off-road with a great tour guide, Aaron Schaefer.
That entire compound is called the Temple Mount. Under that massive platform is the peak of Mount Moriah.
And two extraordinary rabbis, Chaim and Levi Kunin.
The awareness how one man set out to change the entire world from right here.
This is going to be an extraordinary adventure. We're in the land of miracles. Israel, welcome to it. And let's go. Welcome to the land of Israel, God's story. I'm Stephen Paul, Mr. Jon Voight, Aaron Schaefer. Chaim, you changed. Chaim and Levi Kunin. But just so you'll know, this is one of the great biblical sites, but it's also a roadway. You've got music over here, which must be like the days of Samson and Delilah and all that, with all the crazy music going over there with the kids playing.
After such an eloquent introduction, I would like to say that actually behind us, right behind us on this hilltop, is where Samson did grow up. His family was there, and he was a Nazirite. He was raised as a Nazirite, told by the angel of God to raise him as a Nazirite from the beginning, which meant that he would never cut his hair, he would grow his beard, he would never drink wine, he would never eat grapes. Many, many different things the Nazirites had to do. And he was raised as a Nazirite. In the valley behind us was the land that was overtaken by the Philistines. They were occupying that land little by little. And if you see behind us, you see that grove of trees there. Right behind that, there was a Philistine village. And in the ground right below us here, they would come and have ceremonies, and the children would sing and dance. It was a natural amphitheater. Samson would hear their activities from here, just as we are hearing these drum beats, Philistines from over here, and he was drawn to it, and so he wound up going down there and finding a very beautiful girl, and he wanted to marry a Philistine, and came back here to his parents and announced his intentions. And of course, they were just like the mothers of today, say, "You couldn't find a nice Jewish girl." So it was something like that actually happened, but he insisted. And now I'm just going to, before I turn this over to Aaron, I'm going to say that the personality of Samson was quite remarkable in the history of this people, of the Israelites and the Jewish people, because he seemed to defy a lot of the things that we would portray as the perfect man of God. But on the other hand, he was being guided by God, and I have to say personally that I was influenced by this, because when I was a kid and I was going through a ceremony called confirmation in the Catholic Church, and in that ceremony you had to choose a name, a middle name, and I thought about it. And when I was a young boy, I was influenced, but there was a movie with Victor Mature as Samson, and Delilah was played by a very beautiful woman. And I was attracted to the woman and the heroic nature of Samson. And I said to this, I don't know, it was a priest or something that said to me, "Well, what is your name?" They're going to write down my middle name. And I said, "Samson." And they said, "No, you can't have that." And you know the name that I selected? I selected the name Paul. So my name is Jon Paul Voight. Although on Wikipedia they say Jon Vincent Voight, that's all baloney. My name is Jon Paul Voight, but I never use the name Paul, but because I've been adopted by this family, there's a significance to it. Anyway,
Actually, it was Voightstein, and they changed it at Ellis Island to Voight. Is that right?
yeah, close. Now I want to turn it over to Aaron because the personality and the stories of Samson is somehow very appealing, but also very complex. So I want to just turn things over now to my friend Aaron.
Yeah, so we're standing here actually on the mountaintop that's called Tel Zorah, the ancient site of Zorah, which is mentioned right in the book of Judges as the place where Samson and his family lived. And the basic story is that an angel comes to his parents that we talked about and tells them they're going to have a son who's going to be a Nazarite, but then he grows up. And where the story picks up is that he grows up in Zorah, in the Israelite camp of Dan, between Zorah and Eshtaol, and he never ventures out until he becomes a young man. And the thing that John and I were talking about before that I find fascinating when you come to this site, you understand, and that's what I always want to do, is take the story that's in the book and connect it to the site. When we walk this hill, everywhere we look, it's all wine presses. And that means that this was a terrace where they were growing grapes. Always in the ancient time, you grow grapes on the terraces along the slope of the mountain. And down in the valley is the wheat fields, right? So Samson, almost ironically, is ordered to be a Nazarite from the womb. He can't touch grapes, he can't eat grapes, he can't drink wine. But he grows up and lives in a place that we can see all about wine and wine production. So I'm not making any conclusions about what that means. But there's a sort of conflict going on from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm. And with that said, we'll be right back. And welcome back to the land of Israel, God's story.
And so talk about Samson's place in the history and in the history of the judges. The time period from the end of Joshua's passing to the beginning of Samuel's time, and that's 400 years.
Approximately 400 years.
Where the people in the land of Israel now were in some kind of zone where they didn't have complete leadership. Is that right?
Yeah, it's when you read the book of Judges, there's one verse that repeats itself maybe half a dozen times throughout the book. It says, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Each man did what was favorable in his own eyes, what was right in his own eyes." And so really that's the theme of this period. The theme of this period is a sort of anarchy. Each tribe is fending for itself, each family is fending for itself, and generally they don't have much to do with one another unless a major threat comes from outside. If the Moabites attack, if the Philistines attack, then sometimes the tribes get together in the good cases, like in the case of Deborah, in the case of Gideon. The tribes get together and they ally, sometimes a few of the tribes, 2 or 3, sometimes more, and they defend against the enemy. And then in the less good cases, or the less revealed good cases, I guess you would say, are cases like Samson, where God sends a character who, on the face of it, is far from the ideal leader that we would expect, right? Samson is a Nazarite who grows up around wine on the edge of the Philistine area, who marries a Philistine girl who is the enemy, and ends up dying in a Philistine temple with his eyes gouged out at the end. Yet he is the one who caused the fear of the Israelites to be on the Philistines, even for many years after he died. The Philistines were afraid of the Israelites because of him, and so God brought about protection and salvation for his people from the Philistines through the vehicle of Samson, a character that seems to be far from ideal on the face of it.
How old was he when he met Delilah?
I don't think we know. But it says the boy grew, which means he was a young man. Maybe he was 18, maybe he was 20, young man who's starting to get into marriageable age, thinking about those things, and he can see it. When you're standing here, if someone walks with a colorful dress or something down that road, you can see the colors on their dress. So imagine the Israelites, who their culture was very plain and simple. the Israelite girls probably wore plain brown or like beige or whatever. And you can imagine that the Philistines had a very colorful and developed culture. They came from the Aegean Sea. They were a sort of like proto-Greek people. They had developed music, developed food culture, wine culture, beer culture. They had iron making at a time when the rest of the region was in the Bronze Age still, which is a much...
Which is the reason why they could control the territory that they're occupying behind us, right?
Right, so throughout the period of the Judges, the Philistines always controlled the low-lying flat areas, while the Israelites generally controlled the hilltops and the mountains. And the reason is because the Philistines brought into the land of Israel from their origin in the Aegean Sea. They brought the technology of making iron to a region where that technology was not widespread yet. And with that technology, you can make chariots. You can't make it axle of a chariot from bronze, it's too soft. So when you bring that technology into the area, imagine this area behind us like a big racetrack. And you see these guys, they've got ATVs, they can even race on the mountains. But the Philistine chariots couldn't race on the mountains like an ATV. They could only race on the flat plain, on the terrain. So wherever it was flat, the Philistines had complete and utter superiority, and the Israelites never even tried to fight them on the plain.
See, the uniqueness of Samson is that his flaws are very open in the Torah, in its description. And the Talmud is very clear about that he did not succeed in certain areas, including what you just mentioned, the fact that his eyes were taken out at the end of his lifetime is related to the choices that he made. And yet at the same time, there's a great lesson that he still was there as a messenger of God to be there for the Jewish people. And yet there's this great disappointment and unhappy, sad ending to this great superhero, Jewish superhero, who falls from grace. But yet at the same time, his journey, which begins, I would imagine, with a great amount of self-confidence and a feeling of invincibility, and at the same time when he succumbs to that, and his great downfall is not the end of his story, because at the very end of his life, he was able to not just provide a redemption for himself, even in the process of his demise, but also to bring about a period of peace amongst the Jewish people and its neighbors who sought their destruction.
Could you recite the last words of Samson? His prayer to God to give him strength?
He says, God, please give me strength this one last time, that I can take vengeance against the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And at that time, his strength comes back to him. And for that moment, when, let's back up, at the end of his life, he finds himself with his eyes gouged out by a Philistine girlfriend. He tricked him and cut his hair when he was unaware. And at that time, when he lost his strength, they tied him down. They gouged out his eyes. They tortured him. They beat him. And, he was bloodied. They dragged him to the Philistine temple and displayed him in front of their pagan god, chained to the 2 pillars of the temple. And everyone's celebrating and enjoying in their religious festival while he is sitting there with his eyes gouged out, probably in his own blood, suffering. And he turns to God at that time. And until now, he knew that if he keeps his Nazirite vow, he has his strength. When his hair is cut and his vow is broken, he loses his strength. But here, his hair was freshly cut. He lost his strength, and he turned to God finally and said, forget about the vows, forget about the supernatural strength that I had as a result of this agreement that my parents had with you and that I tried to keep to the best of my ability until now. I'm just asking, give it to me for free, basically. Let me have this last moment. If I'm going to die anyway, let me take vengeance on the Philistines and protect my people together with my death. But God gives him back his strength at that last moment, and he pulls the pillars or pushes the pillars, and down tumbles the temple, killing thousands of Philistines. And that act, that final act, when the Philistines thought that they finally had him, and they found the secret of how to control these wrong Israelites, and then they realized that no, there's no way to control him. That caused that for 20 years after Samson died, the Philistines left the Israelites alone.
Samson?
And with that said, We'll be right back after a word from one of our sponsors.
Good work, Samson.
Welcome back to the Land of Israel, God's story. And we have found out that Aaron is not only one of the greatest Torah guys, rabbinical scholars, and so knowledgeable about everything in the Bible, but he's also a scribe. Do we call it a scribe or a scribe? Beautiful. I'm glad that I said it correct. Why don't you explain to us what it is that you actually do, Aaron?
So the job of the Sofer Stam, as it's called in Hebrew, or the scribe, is to write all of the ritual scrolls that the Jewish people use in our religion, the biggest and most important one being the Torah scroll, the 5 books of Moses that's brought out and read in the synagogue, which is actually written by hand on parchment. And then the other 2 obvious scrolls are the tefillin, which are the scrolls which are wrapped up inside the black boxes that Jewish men wear on their head, next to their mind, and on their arm next to their heart every morning when we pray. And then the 3rd scroll, which is very common, is what we're going to do now, the mezuzah, which is the scroll which is rolled up and put in the little box that Jewish people have on the right side of their door as you enter, has written by hand the words, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And all of the continuation of that text, the way it's written in the Torah. And it has to be written by hand, by a scribe. It has to be written with black ink on parchment. And it's very important that before the scribe starts writing, that he declares his intent that what he's doing now is for the sake of the mitzvah, the commandment of writing the mezuzah. And then when he reaches the first place where he writes the name of God, he has to stop once again and say, I hereby write for the sake of the sanctity of the name of God. And each name of God, he has to say that again before he writes. And if a scribe would, let's say, just write without making these declarations, even though everything comes out perfect and it's indistinguishable from a kosher mezuzah, the mezuzah would not actually be kosher at all. It would not be permitted to use it. And the only one who would know that is the scribe himself who wrote it. So let's get started. I'm going to make my declaration in Hebrew. Harini koisel Hashem kedushas mezuzah. V'kol atzkaro shaboy l'shem kedusha Hashem. Shema. I'm okay, you could talk. A mezuzah like this takes me about 3 hours. Now I've come to the name of God, so I can either stop here or I can keep doing a little more. But I think you have enough footage,
I think
right?
we got it.
For Stephen, Shmuel, since you came to my office, I want to give you something.
With you.
This is a mezuzah scroll that I wrote.
Ooh.
Okay. And this is for you to put in,
Wow.
in your home
Fantastic.
in California.
Thank you so much.
I'll get you a bag for it. So
Beautiful.
pack it up.
That's amazing. I mean, it looks like it's been done by a machine. It's so
I am
perfect.
a machine. I am a machine.
You are a machine. Thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
This is the Land of Israel, God's story.